Hi and welcome. My name is Carolina Kaufman, and I'm the Director of Education and Engagement here at the Pentacrest Museums. We're so delighted and excited to welcome you to this session in our Exhibition Spotlight program, Anne Frank in All of Us. This is the first of a two-part webinar series highlighting the traveling exhibition, Let Me Be Myself, the life story of Anne Frank. The Pentacrest Museum served to advance the educational research and engagement missions of the University of Iowa, enhancing campus-wide focus on cultural and environmental diversity. Let Me Be Myself, the life story of Anne Frank, and these webinars is a perfect fit for our museums. We hope that this exhibit will inspire continued conversations about the significance of Anne Frank's life story that it has with all of us and with society today. It's an honor to highlight the many connections created out of the international collaboration to educate on Anne Frank's legacy. That collaboration has been made possible through this exhibit. We're going to meet some of the remarkable individuals involved today. As the Old Capitol Museum serves to host the exhibit and we commemorate the 175th anniversary of the University of Iowa, we want to acknowledge the native lands we stand on as the homelands of the following tribes and the many tribes and indigenous nations that continue to thrive in the state of Iowa. As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and the traditional territories of these tribal nations and the history of disposition that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experience of Native peoples will help inform the work we do. Collectively, as a university, to engage in building relationships through the academic scholarship and collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment, and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, our present, and future Native nations. We will share some links soon on this, and you're welcome to learn more. The exhibit on view was produced by the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam and distributed throughout the U.S. by the Anne Frank Center at the University of South Carolina, an official partner of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. The exhibition Spotlight series, along with the Provost Global Forum events this month, has been made possible through the hard work and collaboration of faculty, staff, and students of international programs, the Division of World Languages, and the Provost Global Forum, among others, with support from the staff at the Pentacrest Museums. I would be remiss if I didn't extend our gratitude to the Office of the Vice President for Research, whose support makes all the museum's work and exhibit possible. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Janet Hessler of the Danville Museum and Anne Frank Pen Pal exhibit in Danville, Iowa. Janet and her husband, Bob Hessler, along with Sherry and Paul Drinkall and the Ed and Joyce Blow, founded the Danville Museum on March 2007 in the hopes of telling the important story of an Iowan teacher in 1939 who matched up her students with pen pals in Amsterdam. We are excited that Janet will share this amazing and historic connection Iowa has with Anne Frank. Dr. Kirsten Kumpf Baele, lecturer and outreach coordinator of the German Division of World Languages, Literature, and Cultures at the University of Iowa. Kirsten is a lecturer and outreach coordinator of the German Division of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at the University of Iowa. In addition to teaching courses in German literature, language, and culture, she created and annually teaches the popular seminar Anne Frank and Her Story. It's her proposal that successfully brings the 13th Anne Frank horse chestnut tree to the University of Iowa, and by extension, to the larger Iowa City community and state. I also want to welcome Doyle Stevik, Executive Director of the Anne Frank Center at the University of South Carolina. Doyle Stevik is the founding Executive Director of the Anne Frank Center and the official partner of the Anne Frank House in the United States, the only partner site in North America. That said, let's begin. We're going to help frame this session with a couple of goals in mind. First, we want to think about connections. Anne Frank and her writing have many different connections that a lot of people can relate to and covers many themes such as identity, love, aspirations, connections in terms of how we are connected in terms of a society that still deals with issues of hate and discrimination, and how that changes our identity or supports our identity, as Anne Frank's writing clearly expresses. I also want to emphasize in this program that we're going to talk about the power of words. If it weren't for Anne Frank's words, we wouldn't have had the legacy or the story behind what she was going through. In addition to that, words stay with us. While Anne Frank unfortunately did not live to see her work come to life in a way as a writer and her aspirations to become a writer, she was, and her words are a living testimony to that. So through her words, her life can continue. This voice, among many voices, requires us to remember not just Anne Frank, but 1.5 million children, in fact, over 1.5 million children whose voices were lost too soon and were systematically murdered by the Nazis in World War II. We want to continue to remember those voices and testimonies as a way to continue the conversation, that this will not be forgotten, and that we need to continue to remember and have conversations about difficult topics that Anne Frank and others had to live through. This becomes a very relevant and real situation that we need to come together as a community and discuss. So we will talk about the relevancy, and not only that, what you at home can do, the call to action and the opportunities that actually bear fruit, if you will, bear fruit in terms of having the potential to make a difference both in your community and in society. I'm excited to now introduce you to Janet Hessler, who will share the story of Anne Frank here in Iowa.
Good afternoon. Our little corner of the state has a unique story to tell about Anne Frank and her Danville pen pal. Miss Bertie Matthews was an innovative teacher who wanted to bring the world to her Danville students, knowing some of them may never travel outside of the state of Iowa. During her summers off from teaching her students, Miss Bertie was learning herself by traveling abroad or by taking classes at Columbia University in New York. In 1939, Miss Bertie challenged her students to join an international correspondence exchange in which they would write to schools around the world to encourage a pen pal correspondence. In early 1940, names arrived from a Montessori school in Amsterdam, and 10-year-old Juanita Wagner picked the name of Anne Frank. After Juanita and her older sister Betty wrote letters to Anne and Anne's older sister Margot, they waited patiently until early May 1940 when the letters arrived in Danville from Amsterdam. Juanita's letter was dated April 29, 1940. Dear Juanita, I did receive your letter and want to answer you as quickly as possible. Margot and myself are the only children in our house. Our grandma is living with us. My father has an office and mother is busy at home. I have not far from school and I am sitting in the 5th class. We have no hour classes. We may do what we prefer. Of course, we must get to a certain goal. Your mother will certainly know this system. It is called Montessori. We have little work at home. On the map, I looked again and found the name Burlington. I did ask a girlfriend of mine if she would like to communicate with one of your friends. She wants to do it with a girl about my age, not with a boy. Did you yourself write the letter I received from you, or did your mother do it? I include a postcard from Amsterdam and shall continue to do that. Collecting picture cards, I have already about 800. In case you and Betty get a photo, do send a copy, as I am curious to know how you look. My birthday is the 12th of June. Kindly let me know yours. Perhaps one of your friends will write first to my girlfriend, for she also cannot write English, but her father or mother will translate the letter. Hoping to hear from you, I remain your Dutch friend, Anneliese Marie Frank. Remember, the letter was written by Anne on April 29th, 1940. The Nazis invaded Holland on May 10th, 1940. Iowa in wartime. The picture on your left is a Danville citizen who was hired by the government to dig post holes for a barbed wire fence around the 19,000 acres of the Iowa Ordnance Plant in Middletown, Iowa. He put his innovative mind to work and invented an automated post hole digger. Victory Gardens. Many young students helped with the war effort by helping with scrap metal drives, rolling bandages, and helping plant victory gardens in their backyards and in their communities. Victory gardens helped divert scarce tin supplies for military use and free up food for the war effort and help stabilize the country's food supply. The following video is Betty Wagner, who wrote to Anne's sister, Margot.
Well, the Pen Pal program got started by Miss Birdie.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. Let me start that over again.
Well, the Pen Pal program got started by Miss Birdie Matthews, our 7th and 8th grade teacher. And she was very unique as I look back at it now, because she would travel on her vacation in the summertime to Europe and to learn what's going on in the rest of the world. And it must have been about 37 or 38 that she went. It was in Europe before the Hitler came into really power. And she was in Amsterdam and decided to go to a Montessori school and meet the teacher, and which she did. And she told her that she would like to get the names and addresses of some of these young people, boys and girls, for pen pals to give to her students when she came home, which is what she did. And at that time, Juanita, my sister, had just coming out of the 6th grade after missing a year of school because of her eyes. And when she came into the 7th grade, when the names and addresses were given out, Juanita was given the name Anne Frank. I don't remember a lot of the details, except I know that for some way we knew that Anne had a sister named Margot, who was 4 years older. So that made Margot my age. And we wrote right away because, we didn't have television. Sometimes we didn't even have radio. And a little weekly newspaper that was not very worldly minded. So to write to somebody overseas was a great thing to do. And I can remember how excited we were. And people say, what did you write? Well, I imagine that we wrote that we lived on a farm with our mother, and we had cows and chickens and pigs and whatever. It's just friendly talk. Anyway, we answered right away. Juanita wrote to Anne, and I wrote to Margot, and we got them in the mail. And eventually we got a letter back. It was from the girls. Had a postal card that had their school pictures, the same one that you see on the Anne Frank diary. And they were written in English. And we really couldn't understand that because we were pretty sure that they didn't know English. But we were thrilled anyway. And we sat down and answered it right away. Well, the Germans had gone into Holland within a few weeks after that correspondence came in 1939. So we knew that we might never hear from them again, and we never knew didn't know what was happening. I can remember that we'd talk about Anne and Margot and wonder how they were doing, and are the bombs dropping there, or are they got enough food to eat? We didn't know, but we always thought about them. We never forgot those pen pals, and were very important to us. And then when the war ended, I was in Rock Island, Illinois, teaching in a country school, and I wrote a letter to Anne and Margot at the address that we had. I didn't even know if they would get the letter or if where they lived was still there. I had no idea. And it took about 3 or 4 months, and I got a letter back from their father, Otto, handwritten, about 5 pages, telling about what had happened to them during the war and how they had hidden in the attic and how hard it was on Anne. And I cried, we all cried, and I answered him, but I did not keep up a correspondence with him. And that's how we got that name, and which became very famous. Who knew?
I wanted to add. So those were, in her words, by Betty, the older sister. What a testament. Thank you, Janet, for sharing. I now share, I want to invite Kirsten Kumpf to please introduce herself and share her story and connection with Anne Frank.
Yes, thank you, Carolina. Hello, everybody. My doctorate is in Germanic studies, and yet ever since I conducted dissertation research at the University of Ghent in Belgium, I also developed a strong curiosity in the Dutch language, literature, and its attendant culture. And while in Belgium, I regularly asked myself how other teens hid, wrote, and experienced the Holocaust outside of Germany in the occupied countries. During this time, I visited the Anne Frank House, the Jewish Historical Museum, the National Holocaust Museum, and other remains of the once thriving Jewish neighborhood in Amsterdam. And as a result of these influences, I have worked at sharing Anne's tragic but inspiring experience and her humanitarian message with my students in my GE Diversity and Inclusion approved seminar, Anne Frank and Her Story. I often ask myself, why is Anne's diary not taught more at the collegiate level? I found that if she's being taught, then she's being taught at the middle or high school level, but usually very peripherally. And I wanted to change that. In my classroom, students explore Anne's account vis-a-vis modern day stories of discrimination. Students in my class wrestle with concepts of self-identity and how some are stigmatized. How does someone combat implicit biases and stand up against prejudice, discrimination, hatred, and violence in a 21st century context? As Anne once wrote, only if every individual can be him, her, themselves, can one be satisfied. Accepting, moreover, celebrating others' differences is the first step in fulfilling Anne's personal wish. So I started this course in 2017. This is the 5th year that it's being taught, and it's grown in such beautiful and collaborative ways, I will say. Anne's story continues to have a place in contemporary memory, and her legacy communicates larger themes which resonate with my students. Anne Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany. At the age of 4, she moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands because her parents, Otto and Edith, were worried about Germany's economic crisis, Hitler's rise to the chancellorship, and the anti-Semitism around them. At such a young age, Anne is forced to leave her friends, her family, to start a new life in a new country and to learn a new language, Dutch. I too moved at the exact same age, 4 years, and I can say it was a difficult move from one part of the world to another. I moved from the United States to Germany. So I'm fascinated by Anne's transplant experience, her impressions and discoveries as she adopts a new language, and her social nature and keen intellect, I feel, helped her overcome these hurdles at the beginning. Although my seminars are filled, this spring I'm even teaching 2 sections, I have noticed that many of my students know very little about Anne Frank and very little about the Holocaust. Before we begin the diary, I often ask my students to go out and conduct an interview with 10 of their friends or acquaintances and pose the question, who was Anne Frank? The responses students share in the classroom connect very well with Nina Segal's recent article in the New York Times, Anne Frank Who? Museums Combat Ignorance about the Holocaust. Not only has the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam chosen to renovate due to the many visitors who require more context before viewing the annex, but I too realize that Anne's and many other experiences are just not known, and I want to make those stories accessible. On this slide, you can see some of the other stories, because Anne's story is not the only story. It is not the universal story. My class also examines other diaries composed by young individuals in hiding physically, but also sometimes hiding metaphorically in plain sight by assuming other identities. And yet these stories are barely known. So our course in some centers on storytelling and how individuals represent their personal histories and narratives and celebrate a shared humanity. An aspect that is curious to note in many of these young writers' accounts is that they incorporate nature and trees more specifically in their writings. While hiding in the annex, Anne was able to view the crown of a horse chestnut tree in the courtyard behind Prinsengracht 263 through the attic window. And this was one of the only windows that was not blacked out. This tree came to represent so much for Anne. It represented, in my opinion, life, freedom, dreams of a better future, the outdoors, which she so enjoyed. And it was her lifeline. And other young writers who my students and I study in the course, we find out they also have found consolation in nature. And so these references and reflections in all of their forms ignited a new research interest for me. On February 23rd, 1944, Anne writes, quote, "I looked out at the blue sky, the bare chestnut tree glistening with dew, the seagulls and other birds glinting with silver as they swooped through the air. As long as this exists, I thought, this sunshine and this cloudless sky, and as long as I can enjoy it, how can I be sad?" End quote. As I mentioned, trees surface in the most unique ways in all of these different accounts. Consider here too, I think very interesting, Anne Frank's strong interest in family trees. And these are some of the images that she had on the wall in the annex where she lived. In conducting this research on the representation of trees, I learned that saplings from Anne's beloved horse chestnut tree, which sadly, as you can see here, succumbed to the elements in 2010, were propagated prior to its demise and have been distributed to select locations as a way to continue and expand on Anne's legacy. So a dream developed for me to bring one of these saplings to the University of Iowa, to Iowa City, a UNESCO City of Literature. And so I was in touch with the Anne Frank Center USA. I shared my passion for teaching and research, and I made clear to them that I felt my community and my campus needed to have this tree. It's a remarkable campus, a remarkable community that we call home. And I wanted to share my enthusiasm for spreading seeds of knowledge and imparting change. And so here you can see I'm holding the shovel, and here we are. It's happening. My proposal was selected, and Frank's tree and her story will take root in Iowa on April 29th, and this will be the 13th sapling planted in the United States. I'm eager to witness all of the fruits that it will bear. Students in my seminars this term already are connecting with the sapling in my classroom. And I'd like to now share with you some student voices, our new generation, former students of mine in Anne Frank and her story, who can already attest that Anne's story has made an impact on them here in Iowa.
I think that Anne Frank's diary has become so significant because it showcases how individuals endure trauma and find hope in nature. Anne was confined to the secret annex for 2 years and was not able to go outside, but she was still able to find peace in the little patch of sky that could be seen through the attic window, and she referenced the chestnut tree that stood outside the secret annex several times throughout her diary as a symbol for hope. I think this message of hope is especially important in our current social and political climate as we all attempt to cope with the struggles of living through a global pandemic. I think we could all benefit from Anne's humanitarian message of showing compassion for others and holding on to hope for a brighter future.
Every time I read Anne Frank's diary, I am left in awe of how optimistic she was. Her dreams and her aspirations never really faltered. She would hear the most horrible things on the radio, yet she still wrote things like, "I still believe that people are really good at heart." And she also wrote, "I don't think of all the misery, but the beauty that still remains."
So one quote that I took away from this class that I find myself thinking about a lot on campus is Anne's advice when you're feeling a little bit depressed. And it's really important to me to remember this because she went through a lot, and even in her situation, she always found a way to feel happy and to be positive. So the quote that she wrote was, "Go outside to the country, enjoy the sun and all the nature has to offer. Go outside and try to recapture the happiness within yourself. Think of all the beauty in yourself and everything around you and be happy." And that's really helped me throughout the semester when I'm feeling a little bit down.
I think something that is valuable about Anne Frank's diary is how it can relate to a lot of people, regardless of the situation, regardless of who you are, the identities you hold.
Anne's story transcends time and place in that it reminds us to use our power and privilege to bring about justice and equity for those who are being oppressed.
I think that her story can be a reminder that we have the power as everyday people in our lives to take action against hate and prejudice. And I think that the tree will serve as a great reminder that we have the opportunity to learn and grow and really be that agent of change.
After taking this course, having the Anne Frank sampling come to the University of Iowa would mean a lot to myself, and I feel like a lot of members of our community, because of how inspiring Anne Frank's story truly is and how many demographics she's able to touch through her literature at such a young age.
The original tree was a real source of comfort for Anne when she was in hiding, and so I really hope that when this tree enters our community and our campus, that it takes on a similar role for the people here. And I really hope that in the future I see students sitting out on the Pentacrest around the tree, talking and studying and writing how Anne used to when it was outside her window. And I think she would be happy to know that it is in a community surrounded by art.
The significance of having an Anne Frank tree sapling here on campus is that it continues her legacy alongside showing us that her story remains important and applicable in 2022. This tree is an opportunity to learn and to tell Anne's story for generations to come.
That was incredibly inspiring. Thank you for sharing those student voices, the next generation of people that can continue keeping Anne's message alive. I want to now go on, and as she wanted to go on living after her own death, to find the ways that we are doing this today to keep the message alive. And I'm excited to bring Doyle to the table. Welcome, Doyle.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Shall we dive right in?
Yes.
Pictured here is the site of our permanent exhibition at the University of South Carolina, our Anne Frank Center. And just as we are so inspired by Anne's words and voice, it was also her father who survived, who got it published, and then built the famous institutions that we're so familiar with. And I thought this brief clip from Otto just helped to shape what we're all about. So let's go ahead and sample that quick video.
The lecture hall, and we have our recreation room, and there we want to get people in contact with each other. We have a lot of discussions. This summer it started only about problems of peace, about tolerance, about anti-Semitism, about the Arab-Israel question, about all sorts of international discussions, because people are interested what is going on. Youth want to know. It is the answer, our idea and our aim to get people to understand each other. No, if they are black or white or yellow, if they're Catholic or Protestant or Jews or Muslims, whatever, we have to live in one world, and as long as we don't know each other, there are misunderstandings. The more people we get here in contact with each other, who more they try to understand each other and to understand that we are different, but that we could get along very nicely. I don't think anyone wants war. Every no population wants war, and we have to discuss all these questions. Of course, it's only a little part of people we can get here, but every little thing helps.
So it's an inspirational message that Otto shares with us here, and it's very much in the spirit of Anne's famous remark that people are truly good at heart. In that spirit, if we bring young people together, help them learn to listen to one another and share our stories, truly try to understand one another, then we'll learn that we have to live in one world and we can appreciate our differences. To that end, one of our tasks is to help people learn to discuss difficult issues. So 35 years ago, the Anne Frank House realized, of course, people have a very powerful experience visiting Amsterdam. We already have some remarks in the chat about just how meaningful that visit is, but most people can never come. This is what Miss Birdie recognized too, right? So how do we get people into touch with one another? So their first answer was to create traveling exhibitions. And that program was a stunning success. It traveled the world. It's been in 89 different countries on a shoestring budget. And it's just extraordinary how successful it's been. But the Anne Frank House realized something else that's very special, and that is Anne had things to say. Young people have things to say. Their words matter. And therefore, we shouldn't just have experts conveying historical content. Otto insisted that we needed to learn not just history lessons, but also the lessons of history. We learn about the Holocaust and we learn from the Holocaust. So the Anne Frank House adopted peer education as a method to go with these traveling exhibits. Young people understand peer pressure, but few recognize the flip side, their own potential to bring out the best in one another. We try to help them realize that potential. When we visit schools or universities, we take a cross-section of kids from the school or campus, and we work with them for 2 entire days to immerse them in the content, to have these kinds of conversations that are often difficult for us to have. We discuss this history, the themes it raises, and what it means for us today. And if there's one takeaway that we have, it's that we must never be a bystander. We celebrate the heroes, the rescuers, the helpers, and you'll learn about some of them in the exhibit, especially Miepke's, who saved the diary and helped to feed the Frank family. And we celebrate them for good reason. They risked their lives to save Anne and her family and to keep them going. The painful truth is there simply were not enough of them to save the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. And I'm afraid there never will be, because we can't rely on enough heroic individuals to stand up and be the difference. We need to learn to create a new moral consensus, a consensus that we have to stand up together. Because if you know I've got your back and I know you've got mine, then it becomes easier for us to stand up together. And if all of us are standing up together, then we're not swimming upstream anymore. We are the stream. And it's only in this way, by creating true communities of upstanders, that we can create the kinds of differences that we need to create to go forward. And those are the kinds of opportunities we hope to provide to students, helping them become confident, speaking to one another about these issues, recognizing their own power to bring out the best in one another, learning about these themes from history and how they resonate today, and thinking about what we have to do with it. So the Anne Frank House operates with an educational philosophy that they call the 3 R's. For them, it's remember, reflect, and respond. And these 3 R's shape our educational approach. So first, we have to learn the history. So in the exhibit, there's a lot of emphasis on what happened when, so we understand the firm history of the Holocaust. Then we have to reflect on what it means. What are the themes it raises? What does it mean to be an upstander? What was life like in hiding? And then the 3rd R is to respond. What does it mean for us today? How do we act in our own world in a way that can create the kind of world where Anne and every other Anne can realize their full potential and live their natural lifespan. These are the larger goals that we all hope to contribute with our traveling exhibits. And our goal is to get to schools all over the nation. We try to go where communities don't necessarily have all these opportunities and resources. And in fact, the University of Iowa has done a wonderful job of scheduling a tour throughout both Iowa City and then other communities across the state through the first months of this academic year, this year through June. So I'm sure that information will be readily available to be shared, but please find a way to connect with us. And if you can't visit when it's in Iowa City, reach out and we'll bring it to your school. Thank you.
Thank you, Doyle. And thank you, all the presenters here. You've all been significant people that have raised Anne's life in ways that we even couldn't imagine here in the States. So we're so grateful. I want to turn over to maybe a few questions for the panel as sort of an open conversation. We did hear, it was really helpful to hear the young voices that started to talk about what this tree means. And I would like to invite anybody on the panel to share, well, what does this tree mean for Iowa? And how do you hope people will encounter it when it's here?
Kirsten, I think you're the right person to start there.
Yeah, so I think, one of the ways the tree really connects with Iowa was mentioned in the last student voice, and that is Iowa City is a city that embraces art and literature. And when we think of Anne, we still really need to think of her as an international writing figure. And so I think she will fit in so nicely here in terms of all of the writers that we bring to the International Writers Workshop. Also artists that, express themselves here in this community, she will fit in. The campus itself is a campus that has numerous trees that represent literary figures. And so her tree will fit into that mosaic as well. And then, I always come back to the space. I was really thrilled to hear that the Anne Frank sapling will be planted on the Pentacrest, and the Pentacrest has seen a lot of action. It's seen a lot of protest and youthful voices that have come together. And I think Anne would be proud to have her voice contribute to those other youth voices. So in all honesty, I think there's a lot of different ways, and I'm only naming a few, but I think what's going to be beautiful is the way in which this tree will grow, and it will continue to develop its own story here in Iowa. So, the root comes from Amsterdam, and it's being planted in new soil, and it'll assume new meaning here within our state. And it'll be interesting to see how members from our community, members from the state of Iowa, members from the Midwest and the United States, what their reasons are for coming to this tree. And the stories, again, it comes back to storytelling and how do we connect with one another? And I think this tree will ignite those conversations.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I had a follow-up question, and some of this was answered, so feel free to maybe fill some gaps. What challenges do you think, anyone, are still present when teaching Anne Frank and the Holocaust? Doyle, would you like to take this one?
I would hand this question off to whoever would like it, but just to respond further on the first question, planting a tree is an act of optimism. It's an act of looking to the future. These trees can live 200 years. It's the year 2022, and we hope that students at the University of Iowa are writing in its shade in the year 2222. That's something that's really beautiful. And I ask my students the difficult question, what would justice mean for Anne Frank? And at one level, we can never achieve justice for Anne Frank because we can't punish our way to justice for having her life stolen away and society deprived of everything she had to offer, just as all the other victims of the Holocaust. But on the positive side of pursuing justice, I think it's pursuing her dreams in ways that they intersect with ours, moving forward. And when I like to think about, what would have been meaningful to Anne, that chestnut tree meant so much to her. And if she could have ever imagined that that identical genetic twin tree would be in the home state of the girls she was corresponding with and wasn't able to maintain their correspondence, I think she'd be over the moon about that. So that really gives me a lot of pleasure to think about this tree coming to Iowa.
I'm so glad you added that. Thank you, Doyle. And I do apologize for not letting others come in. So please, if there were any other comments on the tree, please feel free. So to my other question, are there still challenges present that when it comes to teaching Anne Frank and the Holocaust?
Yeah, I could comment here. I think, I mentioned that in my conversation earlier, is that, we have to continue to keep in mind that Anne is one voice, and she opens the door, I think, for a lot of additional conversations. But it's important to stress to students that there are so many other voices that need to be looked at, that need to be read, that need to be discussed. And also, there were other groups who were persecuted during World War II, and talking about those stories, and through the lens of those who were persecuted in other ways, I think is really important to stress to students. And then it's really inspiring to see how they want to dig deeper and find out those other stories, and how they reference those in their special projects, in their journal assignments. So that would be another point that I think is important to address.
I have an amusing story perhaps to share, but one of my colleagues was telling me the other day that she was talking about Anne's diary and others writing diary, and her teenager just couldn't wrap her mind around that. Well, who read it? Well, nobody read it. Why would you write something for yourself? Writing has no meaning unless you're getting likes or hits or views. And the whole concept of keeping a diary was just so alien to her mindset. And I think sometimes we forget that those who grew up on cell phones could scarcely imagine, writing for a private side. And so we have to keep finding ways to discover the differences among generations and reconnect.
Thank you. I want to turn to now, with all of this incredible inspiration and ways that we are making it relevant today, either through classes like what Kirsten is teaching, or through the exhibition, or even at the Danville Museum. I wanted to share the different ways that you have in mind on how we can continue the conversation, and a sort of a call to action. So who would like to share how we might continue the conversation today, and what is our role as educators, caregivers, and mentors when it comes to discussing difficult topics like genocide, hate, or the Holocaust?
I could add here for those who are logging in here via Zoom from the state of Iowa, is to visit the many different events that we have going on, and to spread the news of those events to others, and bringing people together through these events, I think, will allow us that opportunity to have those difficult conversations. And it's always about proximity, right? About bringing people together. And I think during, especially these last 2 years, proximity has not been very easy to do. But having the opportunity to visit, if it's via Zoom or in person, the events, and I think Carolina, you'll be sharing some of those events at the end, but encourage encourage your friends, encourage your acquaintances and your family members to participate.
Yes, sorry, I apologize for the small technical difficulty with our slideshow here, but I'm going to go advance to the end and allow Janet to share a great way that they are helping to call to action ways that communities can participate from Anne Frank's Lessons in Stories. So again, apologies for the slight technical difficulties I'm having here. There we go. That's what I wanted to show.
Each year, our 8th graders continue on with the International Correspondence Exchange. They are trying to collect 1.5 million postcards. If you remember in Anne's letter that she sent to Danville, she collected postcards. So our 8th graders each year write all across the world, just like the Danville girls did to find a pen pal. Our 8th graders do to try to collect 1.5 million postcards to represent the 1.5 million children that were killed during the Holocaust. To add to that, we have secured a rail car, a pre-World War II rail car in Germany, which we are trying to raise money to purchase and to ship over here. And we'll put it in our back parking lot behind the museum. And that is where we will display the 1.5 million postcards that we receive. Already the 8th graders have received a little over 30,000 of them.
Wow.
And they're on display up there on the screen.
That's incredible. And here is the address on the screen that you could write a postcard to. So that would be great. Thank you, Janet, for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
How about hosting an exhibit? What if somebody wants to have the exhibit in their community?
Terrific. So our traveling exhibits are all over the country, and we send our trainers with them. One of the exciting things about the exhibit is that it's flexible enough to go into classrooms. So we can take this almost anywhere. You don't have to be in a big city. We love to be in towns where only people nearby know the names of the places. And the exhibits, we put them together with the kids. So we come in and the training starts with us actually building it together. The kids are immediately cooperating, getting familiarized with the content, and they feel a sense of accomplishment when they physically assemble this structure as a team. And that begins that process of thinking, wow, what can we achieve together? That is really part of what we do. We'd encourage you to reach out to us. If you Google Anne Frank Center, you'll find our contact information, and we can start a conversation about how we can bring this to your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Doyle. And I understand that when students are trained to become peer educators, they get a certificate. So what an incredible result out of this, that they feel that they're leading along with their peers in the conversations on Anne Frank through this educational approach. Thank you so much for sharing. We do have many different programs that are coming up that we want to share before we get to Q&A and invite audiences here to ask any questions of our panelists. The Provost Global Forum has a tremendous calendar of events coming up, and that includes panelists and programs from the Iowa Women's Archives. Film Scene is going to have an inline Anne Frank film screening, which I know Kirsten's going to be at. So that's going to be great here in Iowa City. And the Iowa City Public Library is also one of the supporters that are hosting programs. So we're excited, and we'll put in the link in the chat this link, which has all the different programs that you can attend, including our next session as part of the next session, which we're going to highlight how Anne Frank's story has impacted literature today, and in particular children's literature. These are some of the books that actually Kirsten has recommended and has her students read. And this is, Kirsten, if you want to say a moment, tell me more about this image that you're sharing.
Yeah, certainly. So in conducting research on the representations of nature and trees, it's really interesting to note that recently a few children's books have come out where the chestnut tree is actually the main character of the narrative. And I think it's a really unique way to expose this difficult history to younger children, and oftentimes educators and parents struggle with that. You know, when is the correct time to expose a child to this story? And I think these particular works do this in a very innovative way. And so those would be some suggestions to look at, are some of these texts that I have up here.
Thank you. And that actually dives perfectly into what our next session will be on Wednesday, March 9th, 1 month away, actually, where we're going to invite University of Iowa professor to give some context on the history of diaries and in the literature, some of the things that Kirsten is talking about here. And we're also going to invite some notable authors and illustrators that have been inspired by the Anne Frank story. So for example, we're going to have David Polonsky. He's a famous illustrator in Israel who's chiming in all the way from Israel to tell about how he became the illustrator for the Anne Frank diary, the graphic novel adaptation by Ari Folman, who is an Israeli filmmaker. He was also well known for a documentary animated film called Waltz with Bashir, which I highly recommend and got many awards. So he will be on with us next time, along with Nancy Chernin. She is a National Jewish Children's Book Author Award. And she is going to be highlighting not just one, but several books that talk about how young people can learn about identity and discrimination and coping with difficulties in life, but also in terms of resilience and hope. And one book that we're really going to highlight is called Martin and Anne, The Kindred Spirits of Martin Luther King and Anne Frank. Who she highlights because they were born the same year, and such an interesting comparative story to share. So she's going to share more about what that means at the next session. So I hope people will sign up. I'd like to take Doyle to share in this. This is another way that people can learn more.
Sure.
And take part.
And just to follow the point about Nancy Chernin's book, Martin and Anne, the Anne Frank Center does a theater production called Anne and Martin that juxtaposes passages of Letter from Birmingham Jail and the Diary of Anne Frank. It's an extraordinary performance. In addition, we can do that over Zoom. So if that's something your school might be interested in, we can arrange that. If an exhibit's too much, we have some virtual, not only theater, but also virtual tours of the Anne Frank House. So we can give you a guided tour through what the Anne Frank House looked like in 1943 and 1944 with live guides who have worked there on staff. So that's another neat experience we can do remotely. Tools we had to develop during the pandemic that we'll keep using in the meantime. Now back to the slide. The Anne Frank Center USA launched an effort 4 or 5 years ago to support Holocaust education around the country. This effort is one that seeks to build on the talents of teachers, but also support them in the difficult content, bring resources to their area, and assure that every student in the US has access to high quality Holocaust education. If that's something you'd be interested in being involved with and even discussing about Iowa, we're glad to support local efforts by contact with experts and those who can help craft language to do that. We'd certainly welcome inquiries at the address there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doyle. And I want to do a last mention for those that are here attending the session. Before you leave, we are actually going to give away one of Nancy Chernin's books, signed copy. So we will do a random draw and contact you if you are on the program today. And I'm excited that she has offered this as a gift. So we're going to share that at the next session. Thank you. Okay, so now I want to open it up to questions. There is on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A that you can put in the chat, or if you have questions in the chat, you can put them in now. I ask if you do have a question, yes, keep the chat in there. keep it in the chat or keep it in the Q&A, and we'll get to it. So we'll open it to questions at the moment, if anybody has. I know that we've gotten a couple of stories coming in, people sharing their remembrance of the Holocaust or their grandparents. While people are putting questions in the chat, I'll just share this one story by a participant, Chris. Thank you, Chris. My great-grandpa had abandoned my grandpa and remarried, 3 children and a son. The 3 daughters had left the USA to Germany for Catholic studies of the 1930s. The house they stayed was a clock factory converted to a Nazi bomb factory. 2 of the daughters were exported out of Switzerland, while one was trapped in the house for days, and later in the war remarkably exported to Poland. Wow, thank you, Chris, for sharing. And for some people, it's very hard to talk about these things. I think we have. Do we have any questions? We're looking in the chat here. Oh, here we go. I see some questions coming in. And panelists, you can also look at the questions there. Let's see.
Kirsten, can you tell us about the tree planting?
Yes. I see a question that says, how will this tree, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to give everyone more information,
Yes.
The tree will be planted on Arbor Day, April 29th, and the ceremony will start around 5 p.m. We are asking everyone to register, and I can put that link into the chat. The planting ceremony will be on the Pentacrest, right around the lawn outside of McBride Hall. And during that approximately hour-long event, we will hear remarks from various administration or administrative leaders at the University of Iowa, from the local synagogue here, as well as one of my colleagues in the College of Music. Together, we will have the Oakdale Prison Choir singing a song. We will have a playwright, local musicians, and then also a spoken word performance artist. So there's lots that will be happening on that day.
Thank you, Kirsten. That's going to be a historic event that we hope people can attend. And thank you for putting in the link. That would be great. And yes, can anyone participate in the tree planting, Chris? Yes, anybody can, as long as they're here. Correct, Kirsten?
Correct. It's open to the public, and I will put the link in the chat.
This is an interesting question coming in. I have 2 questions. I'll start with this one. What kind of security will this tree have? There are enough mean people in the world that I'm concerned about. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, so I've been working in close combination with 8 individuals, including the associate director of the Obermann Center. And there's a planting committee, and we have also the head arborist from the University of Iowa working with us. And so one of the things that we are hoping to do is have some sort of camera, probably, that will allow us to watch Anne Frank trees grow. And we're talking about, you know, other ways in which we could have just lots of eyes on the tree. We're trying to see this in a positive way, where, you know, the tree can be something that we can all watch together. We can all be vigilant of the tree. It's part of our community. And so in that sense, it kind of reinforces what Doyle was saying, that we're all upstanders of the tree and we need to take care of it.
Thank you, Kirsten.
I'd love to jump in on the question Donna asked in the chat, if that's okay.
Yes,
this
please.
Question about, you know, how do we combat lies? And I talked about the importance of building a community of upstanders. The other half of the equation is building a culture of evidence. When I was in school, and many people were in school, we just had to consume mountains of truth, and we didn't spend much time paying attention to how do we know? Well, if we can learn to start paying attention to the question of how do we know, then we can create some of those, for lack of a better word, crap detectors, right? In an age of social media, when there's so much garbage out there, are we giving students the tools to be able to stumble on a website by accident and know, how can I know whether I should trust this or not? Why should I trust the US Holocaust Museum's website and not this random person over here? Well, we trust one because of the evidence and how it's handled responsibly. So if we can start shifting the focus from what we know and what is true by itself to how do we know, and we recognize that knowledge is changing all the time, that's been difficult for us to handle as scientists tried to make sense of the pandemic, because the advice would keep changing as new discoveries were made and people argued about the evidence. Let's build a culture of evidence. That can be our tool, emphasizing how we know and not just what's true, to give young people the tools to handle the garbage that's out there.
Thank you, Doyle. We have time for about one more question, and then we would like to close with a quote from Anne Frank that Kirsten will read in Dutch as she would have heard it. So why don't we actually do that now? We'll end the session, but anybody can stay on where the panelists are willing to stay on for a couple of minutes to answer a few more questions for everybody. And we're so glad that you could join us today. And Kirsten, let me know if you need that quote up.
I have it right
And
here,
you have
actually.
it. Excellent. Let's go with it. Great.
Okay. So again, I'm reading this in Dutch. Ik weet wat ik wil, heb een doel, heb een mening, heb een geloof en een liefde. Laat mij mezelf zijn, dan ben ik tevreden. Ik weet dat ik een vrouw ben, een vrouw met innerlijke sterkte en veel moed.
Wow. And could you translate that back in English if possible?
You didn't tell me I had to do
Oh,
that.
sorry. I have it.
But
I have
can.
it here. I have it
Okay.
here. Just to share with audiences that we have it here. And the Anne Frank quote is, I know what I want. I have a goal. I have opinions, a religion, and love. If only I could be myself, I'll be satisfied. I know that I'm a woman with inner strength and a great deal of courage. What a wonderful way to end our session today. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Doyle and Janet. We have sent a link with all the events that are coming up. Please come to the tree planting if you are here, to the Global Forum programs, and to our next session on March 9th. A big thanks to all of our partners, and we're so glad that you could come. I am going to stop the recording now.
Thank you. Thank you.